ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at ILTV.tv and watch from any device.
Moving on, a controversial court case decided. The Dutch Court of Appeals on Tuesday reviewing the arguments against Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, whereby a Dutch-Palestinian national blaming Gantz for the deaths of his 6 family members during the 2014 Gaza war. And this as Gantz was at the time chief of the IDF. Citing international jurisprudence, however, it seems that Gantz is in the clear for now.
In de onderhavige zaak gaat het om hooggeplaatste militairen die het officiële beleid van de staat Israël hebben uitgevoerd, waardoor een oordeel over hun optreden noodzakelijkerwijs tevens een oordeel over het optreden van de staat Israël zou zijn. Dat wil de regel van immuniteit van jurisdictie nu juist voorkomen. De Nederlandse rechter is dus niet bevoegd over de claim van eiser te oordelen. De rechtbank heeft dat terecht zo beslist. De beslissing luidt dan als volgt. Het Hof bekrachtigt het vonnis van de rechtbank Den Haag van 29 januari 2020 en veroordeelt eiser in de kosten van het geding in hoger beroep.
In any case, joining with more is specialist in international law, David Benjamin. David, thank you so much for joining us. Now, what is your initial take on the outcome of this case based on the plaintiff's arguments?
I think it's most important to stress that this case didn't go into the merits of the Israeli attack. In other words, there was no discussion of whether the attack was justified in the context of the military operation in Gaza in 2014. This was a technical decision. The decision was that the court does not have jurisdiction to hear the case. So that should be kept in mind. There's no judgment on the actual merits of whether the claim was justified in that sense.
So could you expand on the reasoning behind the judge's conclusions?
Yes, well, there's a concept in international law known as the sovereign equality of states. That means all states are equal, and one cannot exert any kind of superiority or domination over the other. That includes the idea that one state cannot judge the actions of another state. And in this particular case, the state of Israel asserted this principle in the Dutch court, saying that Minister Gantz, he was the chief of staff at the time, was acting on behalf of the Israeli state. He was committing an act of state. And as such, because he was acting for the state, then that is immune from prosecution or judgment under a foreign court. And the Dutch court accepted that principle, which is a universally accepted principle of customary international law.
Well, what jurisdiction do the Dutch even have? Are they part of the ICC investigation? And had Gantz been convicted, what would this mean for him?
Okay, well, the ICC is a separate issue. The ICC is an international court, and it's different from national courts, from courts of states. International courts do have jurisdiction over individuals acting on behalf of states. So there's actually an important distinction there, and the Dutch court pointed out that distinction. Another thing that's important to note is this is a civil action, it's not a criminal action. In other words, there was a plaintiff here, a Palestinian person who lives in the Netherlands, who sued for damages because of the deaths of his relatives in the alleged attack. Not alleged, I think the attack did actually take place. So this was not an issue of whether anybody would be put on a criminal trial. This was a civil issue. And the Dutch court was fairly clear that at least certainly in a civil issue, they wouldn't have jurisdiction in such a case. This is not like the ICC, which at least for itself claims jurisdiction in criminal issues for individual responsibility, even for people acting on behalf of states.
So again, though, what would that mean for Defense Minister Gantz? Would it affect him at all?
Benny Gantz has nothing to worry about as a result of this particular decision, at least. The ICC is a separate issue altogether. The ICC is conducting its own investigation into events, including the 2014 operation in Gaza. And of course, Benny Gantz was the chief of staff then. So he could be, of course, in the crosshairs of the ICC potentially. We still don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but the ICC has authorized an investigation by the chief prosecutor of the ICC into that operation. But we still have to see what will happen there. So it's not like Benny Gantz has nothing to worry about. But in terms of this particular action in Holland, then he's in the clear.
Now, of course, as you said, they're separate, but is there a precedence? What, if any, precedent does this set in international law? For example, are other former IDF soldiers now safer than they were yesterday when they travel abroad?
Well, basically, the Dutch court actually affirmed the principles which has already been set by the International Court of Justice. That's not the ICC, not the International Criminal Court. It's another court, different kind of court, and also by the European Court of Human Rights, that this is the principle of sovereign immunity, that if a person is acting on behalf of a state and the state confirms that that is the case, in other words, not a person who just went out on their own and did something on their own accord, this is a person acting on behalf of the state, then that immunity will be upheld by the state. So that's something that's been set by an international court and a European court and now by the Dutch court. So unless any legal system, judicial system goes rogue, that should be the principle upheld. So I would say that individuals who have been in the IDF in any particular capacity should not have to be worried on that score. The ICC is a different kettle of fish, so to speak. So we still don't know how that's going to play out. But in terms of being subject to jurisdiction by local criminal courts or civil courts, that's unlikely. There is a principle called universal jurisdiction, which some countries assert. I should mention that Israel actually was one of the first countries to really assert that in a major way with Eichmann, of course, when we tried Eichmann, that because of the nature of his crimes, we could assert jurisdiction, even though the crimes didn't take place in Israel. But that's still a relatively novel idea. It hasn't been implemented in too many places around the world. There are some places who have implemented universal jurisdiction. That's the idea that you can have a criminal trial for a war criminal, even if the crimes were committed overseas. But for civil actions so far, the Dutch precedent is a pretty strong one, I think. And I think, as I say, as long as countries don't go rogue, I think one can rely on that.
All right, well, international law expert and advocate David Benyamin, thank you so much for joining us.